The rope bit into her wrists like a cruel snake, twisting her fingers raw, and the wind whipped dust into her eyes as the townsfolk murmured behind their shutters. Lila Marston's heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last, echoing against the wooden walls of the makeshift gallows. Her boots dangled above the dirt street of Deadwood Creek, the sun baking the desert hard and bright. They said she had stolen bread, just a loaf to ease the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. But their judgment was swift and merciless. The sheriff, a lean man with a crooked smile and a permanent squint, wiped sweat from his brow. "Justice waits for no one, Lila," he said, his voice sharp as the knife he carried at his hip. The crowd pressed closer, silent except for the low hum of wind and the creaking of the timber above. Lila's chest heaved. Her dark brown hair whipped across her face, tangling with the grit of the street, and her green eyes burned with a mixture of defiance and despair. She had never felt so alive and so doomed at the same time. A shadow moved at the edge of the town, almost imperceptible against the rocky hills. A man emerged from the dust and sunlight, a figure unmistakably tall and powerful. His skin was bronze, his long black hair catching the sun like liquid night. Beads and feathers glimmered in his hair, and a single arrow was slung across his back. He moved with the fluid certainty of someone born to the land, his dark eyes scanning the scene. The crowd barely noticed him at first, distracted by the spectacle of a woman condemned for hunger. But when the stranger's gaze locked onto Lila, a ripple of unease spread. Even the sheriff hesitated, sensing something in the wind, a quiet storm. "You're making a mistake," the man called, his voice low but carrying across the square. "Let her down." The sheriff laughed, but there was an edge to it that wasn't there before. "And who might you be, stranger?" Another wandering Apache with a soft heart for criminals? The stranger didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, boots crunching over the gravel, the wind tugging at the fringes of his jacket and the leather of his bandolier. His gaze never left Lila. "No," he said finally, "I am a man who knows hunger, and I do not stand for injustice." The townsfolk murmured. Some shuffled their feet, nervous. Some spat on the ground, but the rope above Lila didn't care for the murmurs. It tightened again as if sensing her fear. Her stomach twisted, bile rising. She had spent years running from the law, from cruelty. But never like this. Not with the sun burning her skin and the whole town watching her die. The stranger's hand brushed against the lasso securing the crossbeam. Lila blinked. His fingers were strong, deliberate, and he moved with the precision of a predator. "I said let her down," he repeated. Time slowed. Dust hung in the air like golden mist, the sun painting his bronze skin in firelight. The sheriff hesitated again, sensing the authority in the man's stance, something primal, dangerous, and untouchable. But the law of Deadwood Creek was rigid, unyielding, and men often died for questioning it. Lila's lungs burned. Her throat ached. "Please," she croaked, "please." Her voice was barely audible over the wind, over the fear, over the pounding of her own pulse. She had never prayed, but she did now. For salvation, for mercy, for something, anything. The stranger's hand hovered above the rope, and for the first time, the crowd felt a tense silence, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Then, with a swift, deliberate motion, he cut the rope. Lila's body dropped only a few inches before his strong hands caught her. She gasped, clinging to him, feeling warmth and safety in a way she hadn't in years. And then, against the backdrop of dust, sun, and anxious townsfolk, he pressed his lips to hers, not as a thief of virtue, not as a brash cowboy, but as a man who had saved her life, and in that instant, everything changed. The town gasped, some in shock, some in disbelief. Lila's heart hammered, her senses alive with a taste of dust, sweat, and something altogether new, the thrill of being rescued by a man whose presence promised danger, passion, and freedom. Behind them, the desert stretched endlessly, full of secrets and promise. The Apache who had saved her, known only as Takawi, held her close, his gaze daring anyone to challenge him. This was only the beginning. Lila's lungs burned as Takawi guided her away from the gallows, his powerful arms moving with deliberate precision through the narrow alleys behind Deadwood Creek. Every footstep on the sun-baked dirt echoed like a drumbeat of urgency. Dust rose in small clouds around them, blurring the faces of the townsfolk who dared to watch. Lila's hands still trembled from the rope's cruel bite, but her mind raced faster than her pulse. She didn't know this man, this warrior from the hills, but she trusted him implicitly. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign on her lips, hesitant, fragile. Takawi's eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned the horizon. "Not yet. The sheriff will not let this go easily," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "We need to move, and fast." The alleys narrowed into a maze of shadow and sun, the town's wooden structures stretching like crooked fingers against the sky. Takawi led her through hidden passages, beneath low-hanging beams and behind stacks of barrels, until the sound of boots on the dirt street faded behind them. Lila stumbled once, catching herself against the rough wood of a wall, and he tightened his grip on her arm. "You must stay close," he warned. His hands, strong and calloused, reminded her she had never known true safety until now. His presence was both terrifying and comforting, a paradox she couldn't begin to unravel. Finally, they emerged from the town's edge into the open desert. The wind carried the smell of sagebrush and hot earth. Takawi paused, letting Lila's eyes adjust. In the distance, the jagged silhouette of the hills stretched against the pink and gold-streaked sky. The wilderness promised freedom but demanded respect. "Can you ride?" he asked suddenly, nodding toward a pair of horses tied to a scrubby mesquite tree. Lila swallowed. I've ridden before, yes." Her voice wavered, betraying her fear. The rope, the gallows, the cruel eyes of the townsfolk, everything threatened to collapse her. Takawi handed her the reins of a chestnut mare. His fingers brushed hers, sending a jolt through her spine. "Good, then mount." The horse shied at first, sensing her anxiety, but Takawi's steady hands guided her. When she was finally seated, he mounted his own black stallion beside her. The sight of him on horseback, the muscles of his bare chest flexing with every movement, made her heart beat in a strange, urgent rhythm. As they rode, the sun sank lower, turning the desert into a sea of amber and crimson. Shadows stretched long and menacing, and the wind whispered warnings through the sagebrush. Takawi spoke rarely, letting silence reign. But each word he did share was measured and deliberate. "They will come after you," he said at last, his voice breaking the silence like a stone thrown into still water. "The law here does not forgive. You must be strong, Lila." She nodded, trying to believe in her own courage. She wanted to fight, to reclaim some shred of dignity, but the exhaustion of fear weighed heavy. Her stomach knotted at the memory of the rope, the townsfolk's jeers, the sheriff's crooked grin. I don't know if I can ever face them again," she admitted. Takawi turned his head slightly, his black hair brushing his shoulders. "Courage is not absence of fear," he said quietly. "It is action in spite of it. You are alive because you acted, because you survived." The desert stretched endlessly before them, broken only by the jagged outcroppings of rock and the occasional tumbleweed rolling across the sand. Takawi guided them through hidden washes and dry creek beds, teaching her to read the land, to find safe paths away from prying eyes. Lila's fear slowly began to give way to awe, not only at the vastness of the land, but at the man who seemed born from it. Night fell. and the sky erupted into stars. Takawi built a small fire in a shallow alcove of stone, and Lila watched him work. His movements were fluid, precise, almost ceremonial, as he shaped the flames to warmth without smoke. She felt the rhythm of the land in him, the quiet power of someone connected to the earth. To survival itself. "You saved me," she said finally, her voice soft. Almost afraid it would break the spell of the night, Takawi looked at her. His dark eyes unreadable, but there was a spark there, something unspoken. Something that hinted at more than just gratitude. "I do not save lightly," he replied. "And you?" "Have not yet seen the life that awaits beyond fear." For the first time in hours, Lila allowed herself to breathe fully, inhaling the scent of fire, sage, and leather. Her hands, still raw, rested in her lap. She did not know what lay ahead, but for the first time since the rope had cut her wrists, she felt a flicker of hope. And in the shadows of the desert night, she felt the strength of Takawi beside her, a protector, a guide, and perhaps something more. The desert night was quiet, save for the whispering wind. But Lila knew the journey had only begun. The desert night pressed around them like a living thing, cold and sharp, with stars glimmering like distant fires. Lila shivered under her thin cloak, the adrenaline of escape fading into bone-deep exhaustion. Takawi's black stallion moved with silent grace beside her chestnut mare, hooves barely stirring the sand. Every rustle of brush, every whisper of wind made Lila flinch, the memory of the gallows still vivid in her mind. "They will not stop until they find you," Takawi said quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon as he rode. His dark gaze was unyielding, alert to every movement, every sound. "The sheriff has men in every town, every trail. Deadwood Creek is not forgiving." Lila's hands tightened on the reins. "Then we must keep moving." "But how far can we go?" Her voice cracked. Fear lingered like a shadow, whispering that no matter how fast they ran, the town's reach would follow. Takawi's lips pressed into a thin line. "Far enough to find sanctuary," he said. "But even the desert is not safe for the unwary." They rode in silence, the only sound the quiet thrum of hooves against the hard earth and the occasional night bird's cry. The desert, which had seemed a vast promise under the setting sun, now became a labyrinth of shadows. Jagged rock formations rose like teeth, hiding every twist of trail from prying eyes. Lila's chest tightened with anxiety, each dark shape in the distance morphing into imagined pursuers. Suddenly, Takawi halted, raising a hand. Lila leaned forward, her heart in her throat. "Tracks," he whispered, pointing to the sand. "They have followed us. 2 riders, fast. They will try to cut us off at the canyon." Panic pricked Lila's skin. "What do we do?" Takawi's jaw tightened. "We split. You take the left gorge, I will draw them to the right. Trust the land, trust your horse." Her throat went dry. "You, go," he commanded. The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Lila nodded, fear lacing every movement, and urged her mare toward the narrow canyon to the left. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes, sand stinging her cheeks. Behind her, she heard Takawi's stallion bolt in the opposite direction, the thunder of hooves echoing like war drums. Lila's pulse pounded as the canyon walls closed in around her. Every turn, every shadow, made her stomach knot. She could almost hear the men from Deadwood Creek shouting behind the rocks, though the desert swallowed their voices. Takawi had not abandoned her. She felt his presence in the subtle guidance of the land, the way the tracks and trails seemed to lead her to safety. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning under the desert stars. Lila's limbs ached, but she pressed on, clinging to Takawi's lessons about the land, where to find water, where the sand hid soft patches that would not give way under a horse's hoof, where rocks could shield her from view. Finally, the canyon opened into a hidden oasis, a small cluster of junipers and a trickle of water glinting in the moonlight. Lila guided her mare to the stream, letting the horse drink while she knelt on the earth, pressing her palms to the cool sand. Relief washed over her, but her mind refused to quiet. Takawi would meet her soon, she knew it. His strategy always precise, calculated, unflinching. A sudden sound made her flinch hooves again, but different this time. Takawi appeared at the canyon's edge, his bare chest gleaming under the moonlight, muscles taut, long black hair whipped by the wind. His dark eyes met hers, and in that look was a mixture of relief, pride, and something unspoken, something deeper. "You made it," he said simply, though his tone carried a weight that filled the quiet night. Yes. But you," Lila hesitated, the thought of him facing her pursuers alone sending a shiver down her spine. Takawi smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "They will think twice before following us again. The desert has its guardians." Lila's throat tightened. In the quiet that followed, the stars above seemed impossibly bright, the world stripped to its raw edges. She realized then that Takawi was not just her protector, he was her anchor in a wild, unforgiving land. She met his gaze, and for the first time, her fear began to mix with something more complex: trust, awe, and an unspoken bond forged in danger. "We should rest," Takawi said, gesturing toward the oasis. "The desert will not wait, but we can take the night." Lila nodded, sinking to the soft sand beside the water, letting exhaustion and tension seep out of her bones. Around them, the desert whispered, alive with secrets, promises, and dangers. And as the night deepened, she understood that the story of her escape had only just begun and that Takawi, this enigmatic warrior, would shape the chapters to come. The first light of dawn brushed the horizon, casting pale gold over the desert's jagged edges. Lila stirred, her body aching from the night's ride, muscles stiff and raw. Takawi sat across from her, his silhouette framed by the rising sun, the fire between them smoldering quietly. His dark eyes scanned the horizon with the vigilance of a predator. But there was a softness in the way he glanced at her, a quiet reassurance that, for now, she was safe. Lila's stomach growled. A sharp reminder that hunger had not been left behind in Deadwood Creek. "Do we have food?" she asked, her voice cautious, almost timid. Takawi shook his head. "We must hunt or gather. The desert gives only to those who know how to take without wasting." He stood, moving with a fluid grace to a nearby scrub of sagebrush. Lila watched him, fascinated by his connection to the land, the way his fingers brushed against the leaves, sensing life hidden beneath the harsh terrain. "You can do this?" she asked, incredulous. He turned, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I can." Then, without another word, he disappeared into the brush. Minutes later, he returned, holding a small bundle of roots, edible herbs, and a few lizards caught with a precise hand. Lila felt awe mixed with gratitude, realizing that survival wasn't just about courage, it was about knowing the land in a way she had never understood. They prepared a modest meal together, the scent of roasting herbs and sizzling meat filling the air. Lila noticed how methodical Takawi was, every movement deliberate, precise, almost ceremonial. She wanted to ask him about his past, about the world he came from. But words felt clumsy next to the quiet command of his presence. After eating, Takawi stretched, the sun illuminating the muscles of his chest and arms as he moved. Lila couldn't help but stare, not with desire, but with wonder at the power and confidence radiating from him. "We need shelter for the day," he said, his voice soft but firm. "The desert is merciless in the sunlight, and someone might still follow." He led her to a hidden cave tucked behind a jagged outcropping of rock. The entrance was narrow, almost invisible unless one knew its location. Inside, the cave was cool, a stark contrast to the harsh heat outside. Lila sank to the ground, relief washing over her. "This is incredible," she murmured, gazing at the way the shadows played across the stone walls. Takawi knelt beside her, reaching into his bag to produce a small water skin. "Drink," he instructed. "We cannot afford weakness." As she drank, Lila's thoughts drifted. She had spent years running, surviving by wit and speed, always alone. Yet here, in the presence of this enigmatic warrior, she felt something foreign, a sense of being protected, of belonging, of trust. And though she tried to push the thought away, a small flicker of longing ignited inside her. Takawi studied her quietly, as if sensing her inner conflict. "Fear is natural," he said softly, "but so is trust. You must choose which guides your actions." Lila looked at him, her chest tight with emotions she had never named. She wanted to speak, to tell him the depths of her gratitude, her fear, her something more, but words failed her. She nodded instead, letting the silence speak. Hours passed, and the sun climbed high, painting the desert in harsh whites and yellows. They rested in the cave, conserving strength, listening to the wind wail across the open plains. Outside, the desert whispered secrets of survival and danger. Every sound of rattling rock or distant bird made Lila's pulse quicken. But Takawi's presence steadied her, grounding her in the moment. As the afternoon sun waned, Takawi emerged from the cave, scouting the surrounding area. He returned with a cautious smile. "We are safe for now. No tracks follow us." His eyes softened slightly as they met hers. "But the world beyond this refuge will test us both." Lila's lips parted as if to speak, but she only nodded. Her heart thumped in her chest, a mixture of fear, relief, and something deeper she dared not name. As night fell, the desert stretched endlessly beyond the cave, a sea of shadows and stars. Lila settled against the cool stone, her eyes tracing Takawi's movements as he sharpened his blade and arranged their small camp. The man was both a mystery and a constant, a living emblem of the wild land they now shared, and somewhere deep inside, Lila knew that the trials they faced had only begun and that her life, intertwined now with Takawi's, would never be the same. The wind had shifted by midday, carrying the bitter scent of dust and distant smoke. Lila and Takawi had been moving cautiously, following hidden trails carved into the desert over centuries. Takawi's instincts were honed like the edge of a blade. Every sound, every ripple of sand under hoof was a signal. Lila, still unsteady but growing stronger, rode close behind him, her gaze darting nervously across the horizon. "Takawi," she said quietly, her voice trembling despite her efforts to steady it. "Do you think they've given up?" He shook his head, eyes narrowing. "No, men driven by greed or vengeance rarely give up. We must remain vigilant. Sandstone Ridge will provide cover, but it is also a trap if we're careless." The ridge rose ahead, jagged and imposing, shadows falling like fingers over the desert floor. Lila's heart thumped with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had survived the gallows, the desert, and the relentless pursuit so far, but now her nerves screamed that danger was near. Takawi guided her through a narrow passage at the base of the ridge, the rocks towering above them. "Keep low," he whispered. "If they are following, they will strike here." No sooner had he spoken than a sharp whistle cut through the air. Lila froze, her pulse spiking. From the shadowed cliffs, a group of riders emerged, men from Deadwood Creek, eyes cruel and determined. Takawi's stallion tensed beneath him, muscles coiling like springs, while Lila's chestnut Mari reared slightly, sensing the threat. "Hold steady," Takawi commanded. His voice was calm, but every movement was precise, a predator ready to defend. We are not their prey today. The riders charged, their horses kicking up clouds of sand and dust. Lila's breath caught as they closed in, but Takawi acted with fluid, deadly grace. He guided her horse behind a jagged boulder while he stepped into the open, standing tall and bare-chested, muscles rippling as he raised his hand. His arrow flew with uncanny accuracy, striking a lead rider's shoulder. The man yelped, unbalancing his horse. Lila's eyes widened. She had never seen such precision, such raw power. Takawi moved like a force of nature, each action deliberate, each motion deadly. The other riders hesitated, caught off guard by the ferocity of the lone warrior. "Move, Lila!" Takawi shouted. She spurred her horse forward, weaving through narrow gaps between the rocks, her heart pounding with both fear and awe. Behind her, Takawi engaged the men, arrows striking fast, precise, leaving chaos in his wake. Lila could feel the heat of danger, the adrenaline surging like fire through her veins. The fight lasted only moments, though it felt like hours. Takawi's mastery of the terrain and his skill with bow and blade forced the riders to retreat, dragging their wounded behind them. The desert fell silent once more, save for the labored breathing of horse and rider. Lila's knees shook as she slid from her mare, the first tremors of relief washing over her. Takawi approached, his eyes dark and intense, scanning the horizon for any remaining threats. "You are unharmed," he said, his voice low but steady. "That is what matters." I didn't know you could." Lila stopped, words failing her. Her chest heaved, eyes wide with both fear and admiration. "You were incredible." Takawi's gaze softened. "Survival is not about pride. It is about life. You have survived this far, Lila. You will survive what comes next, as long as you trust yourself and me." She met his eyes, feeling an inexplicable connection that went beyond gratitude. Fear, respect, and something tender and dangerous sparked between them. Her fingers brushed his arm, almost involuntarily, and she felt the strength beneath his skin, the pulse of a warrior who had chosen to protect her. They rested against the rocks, letting the desert sun warm their backs. Lila's mind wandered to Deadwood Creek, to the gallows, to the rope that had almost ended her life. And yet here, in the shadow of Sandstone Ridge, with Takawi beside her, she felt something she hadn't in years: hope. And the possibility of freedom. The desert stretched endlessly, full of dangers and secrets. But for the first time, Lila realized that she was not alone. Takawi's presence was a shield, a guide, and perhaps one day, something more. The wind whispered through the ridge, carrying the promise of trials ahead, but also the promise of survival, courage, and a bond forged in fire and dust. And somewhere deep within her, Lila knew the journey had only just begun. Night had fallen like a velvet shroud over the desert, the stars glittering like shards of glass. Lila crouched near the fire Takawi had built, the flames casting flickering shadows across the canyon walls. The air smelled of sage and smoke, sharp and earthy, grounding her in the moment. Her muscles ached from the day's escape and ambush, but exhaustion was secondary to the thoughts racing through her mind. Takawi sat across from her, his silhouette bare against the firelight, chest heaving slightly from the exertion of battle. His long black hair fell in waves, catching the flames and reflecting tiny points of gold. Beaded necklaces and tribal ornaments clinked softly when he moved. He seemed untouchable, a creature of the desert itself, mysterious, fierce, and strangely tender in his protection of her. "Lila," he said quietly, his deep voice breaking the night's silence. "You've been silent since the ambush. What weighs on you?" She hesitated, fingers tracing patterns in the sand. "I keep thinking about Deadwood Creek, about the gallows, about how easily I could have died. Her voice trembled, and for a moment she looked away, ashamed of her vulnerability. I've spent my life running, and I've always thought I had to do it alone. But now, Takawi's eyes softened. But now you are not alone, he said, his tone almost gentle, almost intimate. You survived because you trusted yourself and because you trusted me. That is no small thing. Lila swallowed hard, her throat tight. I don't know if I can ever repay you. He gave a small, knowing smile. There is no repayment for life saved. Only choices. His gaze drifted to the distant cliffs. But there is something you should know. There are truths in this desert hidden from most, and you are about to face them. Her pulse quickened. What truths? Takawi's eyes darkened. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. I was not always wandering. I had a home, a tribe, a life. And I left it because I could not stay. There are those who would follow me here who would not forgive the past. The men you saw today were not the worst of them, they are only scouts. More are coming, seeking revenge or to claim what was taken from me long ago. Lila's stomach dropped. So, we're not safe? Anywhere. Takawi shook his head. The desert can hide you, shield you, but it can also be a trap if you do not understand it. You must learn its ways, its secrets. Only then will you survive what is coming. Fear tightened Lila's chest, but something else defiant stirred as well. Then teach me, she said firmly, meeting his gaze. If I'm to survive, I need to learn. I don't want to hide anymore. A shadow of admiration crossed Takawi's face. Very well, he said. We begin at dawn. But there is more than survival here, Lila. There is understanding. The land, the life you almost lost. They speak to those who listen. The night deepened, the fire crackling between them. Lila felt a strange serenity amid the tension, a fragile, precious peace. The man beside her was not just a protector. He was a guide, a teacher, and perhaps, she dared think, a companion in a world that had offered her so little doubt as the fire dwindled to embers. Takawi reached over, gently adjusting her cloak against the chill. Their hands brushed, and the contact sent a subtle warmth up her arm, a spark neither could ignore. Lila looked up at him, searching his eyes for meaning, and found a silent promise of safety, of guidance, and perhaps of something more. A sudden rustle at the cave entrance made them both tense. Takawi rose instantly, muscles coiled, eyes scanning the shadows. But it was only a desert fox slipping quietly past them, its eyes glinting in the firelight before disappearing into the night. Lila exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body in a shuddering wave. Takawi returned to his place beside her, settling close enough that the warmth of his body brushed hers. The desert teaches in whispers, he said softly, almost to himself. It will guide those who listen. Lila nodded, her heart still racing, but with a growing determination. She had survived the gallows, the desert, and the ambush, but she was beginning to realize that her journey was more than escape. It was about understanding, courage, and the bond forming between her and Takawi. The desert night stretched endlessly around them, filled with secrets and silent promises. And as Lila lay back against the cool stone, watching the stars shimmer like distant fires, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Hope in the sense that whatever was coming, she would not face it alone. The dawn was a brittle promise, pale light spilling over the jagged desert cliffs. Lila tightened the straps on her worn cloak, her fingers brushing the scars on her wrists from the rope she had narrowly escaped weeks ago. Beside her, Takawi's presence was a quiet anchor, his muscles taut as he scanned the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, silent except for the whisper of wind through sagebrush and the distant cry of a hawk. They're close, Takawi murmured, his dark eyes narrowing. The men from Deadwood Creek. And others. They've tracked us here. Lila's stomach churned, but she straightened her shoulders. She had come far farther than she had ever imagined possible, and she would not falter now. Then we fight, she said, her voice firm, carrying a resolve she didn't know she possessed. Takawi's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. Good. Today the desert becomes our ally. They moved together through a narrow ravine, shadows and sunlight dancing across the sand. Lila's pulse pounded with each step, but she drew strength from Takawi's steady presence. When the first group of riders crested a distant dune, Takawi raised a hand. He did not shout. He simply stood tall, a figure of raw power and determination. The riders hesitated, sensing the resolve in the lone warrior. Takawi's bare chest gleamed under the rising sun, muscles coiled like springs, his long black hair whipping in the wind. Lila's eyes followed him, awe and fear mingling in equal measure. She had witnessed his skill before, but now she saw the full measure of his command over the land and the fear it instilled in those who dared confront him. You saved me, Lila whispered. Almost to herself, her gaze drifting to Takawi. And now? You give me strength? He looked at her, eyes dark and unreadable, yet holding a glimmer of warmth. You have always had strength, Lila. You only needed to trust it and me. The riders charged, dust rising like smoke in their wake. Takawi moved with fluid grace, arrows flying, striking with lethal precision. Lila, heart racing, followed his lead, guiding her horse through hidden gullies and behind jagged rock formations. Together they became a force of nature, the desert itself bending to their advantage. One rider lunged at Lila, brandishing a pistol. Takawi's hand shot out, gripping her mare's bridle, and she veered just in time. The rider stumbled, lost balance, and fell into the sand with a cry. Lila's pulse hammered in her ears, but a thrill of triumph surged through her. She was no longer the frightened woman who had dangled from a rope days ago. She was a survivor. When the last of the pursuers had retreated, Takawi approached, his eyes scanning for further threats. It is over for now, he said, though his voice carried a warning. The world was harsh, and danger never truly ended in the desert. Lila slid from her mare, legs shaking but spirit unbroken. We did it, she breathed, relief washing over her in waves. Takawi's gaze softened as he reached for her hand. His fingers brushed hers, sending a current of warmth through her body. No, he said quietly, you did it. You survived. And you chose to rise even when the world seemed against you. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the wind whispering around them, the desert wide and endless, yet intimate in this quiet victory. Lila looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the sun. She saw not just a protector, but a man who had become her anchor, her guide, and the embodiment of courage she had discovered within herself. Then, as if drawn by the desert itself, Takawi stepped closer. The world seemed to shrink to the two of them, the wind carrying away fear and leaving only clarity. His lips met hers, not in haste, not in desperation, but with the quiet intensity of a bond forged in danger and trust. Lila's arms rose to hold him, the warmth of his body anchoring her to the present, to life, to possibility. When they finally broke apart, the desert stretched before them, wild and untamed, yet no longer a place of fear. Together they had faced death, danger, and the cruelty of men, and they had emerged stronger, connected and free. Lila took a deep breath, the sun warm on her face, and for the first time, she felt the full measure of her freedom. What now? She asked, voice steady. Takawi's smile was slow, confident, and filled with promise. Now, he said, we live. And the desert will guide us. Hand in hand, they mounted their horses, riding toward the horizon where the sun burned gold, the shadows of the past left behind. The journey had been perilous, the lessons harsh, but the desert had revealed its greatest truth: courage, trust, and love could thrive even in the harshest of landscapes. And as they rode together, the wind carrying their whispers across the endless sands, Lila knew that her life had been reborn, not in safety, but in strength, in survival. And in the unwavering presence of Takawi, the desert stretched on before them, eternal, wild, and beautiful. And together they would face it all.